The foreclosure notice crumpled in Evangeline Ashford's trembling hands as her father's voice echoed through the oak-paneled study. "You will marry him, Evangeline. There is no discussion." Reverend Marcus Ashford stood behind his mahogany desk like a judge delivering a death sentence. The Salem Community Church's financial records lay scattered before him, each page marking another nail in their coffin. 30 years of faithful service to God, and it would all crumble because of one man's gambling debts. "I don't even know him," Evangeline whispered, her voice barely audible above the grandfather clock's relentless ticking. "You know enough. Caspian Ravencrest is a successful businessman from New York. He's agreed to settle our debts in exchange for your hand in marriage." The words hit her like physical blows. 28 years of carefully guarded purity, 28 years of believing her father protected her from the world's corruption, and now he was selling her to a stranger. What kind of man buys a wife? Her father's weathered face hardened. "The kind who can save us from losing everything we've built. The church, our home, our reputation in this community. Would you rather see me destroyed?" A sharp knock interrupted their confrontation. Mrs. Henderson, the church secretary, peered through the doorway with nervous eyes. "Reverend Ashford, Mr. Ravencrest has arrived." Evangeline's heart hammered against her ribs. She wasn't ready, would never be ready. "Send him in," her father commanded. The man who entered defied every expectation. Caspian Ravencrest moved with predatory grace, his charcoal suit tailored to perfection, dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble. But his eyes, cold, calculating, almost black, made her instinctively step backward. "Reverend Ashford." His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. "Miss Ashford." When those penetrating eyes fixed on her, something strange happened. The room seemed to tilt, and for a terrifying moment, she saw flames dancing behind his pupils. Children screaming. The acrid smell of smoke filled her nostrils. "Are you all right?" Caspian's sharp question cut through her vision. Evangeline blinked, finding herself gripping the edge of her father's desk for support. Both men were staring at her with concern, though Caspian's expression held something else. Recognition? "I'm fine," she lied, her voice shaking. "My daughter has always been delicate," her father explained quickly. "Nothing that marriage and motherhood won't cure." The casual dismissal of her experience ignited a spark of rebellion. "I'm not delicate. I'm terrified." Caspian's eyebrows rose slightly. "Honest. I appreciate that quality." "Do you?" The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "Then be honest with me. Why do you want to marry a woman you've never met?" Her father's sharp intake of breath warned her she'd overstepped, but Caspian seemed amused rather than offended. "Business requires strategic alliances, Miss Ashford. Your father has something I need." "What could my father possibly have that a man like you would want?" "Respectability. A connection to Salem's founding families. Your bloodline carries weight in certain circles." The clinical way he spoke about her heritage made her skin crawl. "And what do I get in return? Besides the privilege of being your purchased bride?" "Security. Protection. A life far removed from financial worry. But not love." Something flickered across his features, too quick to interpret. "Love is a luxury neither of us can afford." The brutal honesty should have crushed her, but instead, it crystallized her resolve. If she was going to be sold like livestock, she'd at least extract some concessions. "I have conditions." Her father moved to protest, but Caspian raised a hand, silencing him. "Continue. I want to finish teaching the children's Sunday school class through the end of the month. I want our wedding to be small, no media circus. And I want your word that you'll never raise a hand to me." "Done." The quick agreement caught her off guard. She'd expected negotiation, argument, anything but immediate acceptance. Just like that. "I don't negotiate with children or animals, Miss Ashford. You've made reasonable requests." The backhanded compliment stung, but she pressed on. "There's one more thing. I want to know why you really chose me. Don't insult my intelligence with talk about bloodlines and alliances." For a long moment, Caspian studied her with those unsettling dark eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried an undertone she couldn't identify. "You remind me of someone I used to know." The simple statement sent ice through her veins. Something about the way he said it, the careful neutrality of his tone, suggested depths she wasn't prepared to explore. "Who?" "Someone who saved my life once." Before she could press for details, he turned to her father. "The wedding will take place in 2 weeks. I'll have my lawyers draw up the settlement papers. The church's debts will be cleared by Friday. 2 weeks. Evangeline's voice cracked. That's not enough time to plan a society wedding? I thought you wanted it small. I meant time to prepare myself mentally for becoming your wife. You'll have a lifetime to adjust, Miss Ashford. He moved toward the door, then paused. I suggest you use the next 2 weeks to make peace with your decision. My decision? The bitter laugh escaped before she could stop it. I don't recall making any decisions today. You could have refused. And watch my father lose everything? That wasn't really a choice. There's always a choice, Evangeline. Sometimes we just don't like the alternatives. The way he said her name, with careful pronunciation, made her pulse quicken. Had anyone ever made her name sound so intimate and threatening at the same time? After he left, the study felt smaller, the air thinner. Her father slumped into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 62 years. I'm sorry, daughter. If there had been any other way. There's always another way, she echoed Caspian's words. You just chose the easiest one for yourself. The accusation hung between them like a blade. Outside, thunder rumbled across Salem's autumn sky, promising a storm that would mirror the tempest building in her chest. 2 weeks. 14 days to prepare for a life chained to a man whose very presence triggered visions she couldn't explain. A man who looked at her like he was trying to solve a puzzle she didn't know she represented. As rain began pattering against the windows, Evangeline wondered if she was walking toward salvation or damnation. With Caspian Ravencrest, she suspected the line between the two might be dangerously thin. Evangeline pressed her face against the attic window, watching Caspian's black sedan disappear down Chestnut Street. The settlement papers had arrived that morning, along with a wedding dress she hadn't chosen and a list of instructions from his assistant that read more like a military briefing than wedding preparations. The dress hung behind her like a specter, ivory silk with pearl buttons that probably cost more than her father's monthly salary. She'd touched the fabric once and recoiled. It felt like wearing her own shroud. Eva, sweetheart, you need to eat something. Her father's voice drifted up from below, but she couldn't face him yet. Not when every conversation led to the same dead end. 3 days had passed since Caspian's visit, and the weight of her approaching marriage pressed down like a physical force. She turned back to the dusty boxes scattered around the attic. Her childhood belongings, stored away when she'd outgrown them, now seemed like artifacts from someone else's life. A porcelain doll with missing hair, elementary school art projects, a jewelry box that played a broken melody. Something metallic caught her eye, wedged behind a stack of Christmas decorations. A small tin box she didn't remember. Her fingers trembled as she pried it open. Inside lay a child's bracelet, tarnished silver with a small pendant shaped like a phoenix. She'd never seen it before, yet the moment she touched it, images flooded her mind. A woman's voice calling her name. Not Evangeline, something else. Something that started with an E but felt foreign on her tongue. The bracelet slipped from her numb fingers as a vision overwhelmed her senses. Fire everywhere. Screaming children. She was running through smoke-filled hallways, her small hand clutching someone else's. A boy, older than her, his face streaked with soot and tears. She was pulling him toward an exit, somehow knowing the way despite the chaos surrounding them. This way, her child's voice echoed across 20 years. I know the way out. The vision shattered when her father's footsteps creaked on the attic stairs. Evangeline, Mrs. Patterson is here for the final dress fitting. She shoved the bracelet into her pocket and forced steadiness into her voice. Coming. But as she descended the narrow stairs, questions burned in her mind. Why had she never seen that bracelet before? And why did touching it feel like unlocking a door she'd forgotten existed? Mrs. Patterson, Salem's premier seamstress, waited in the parlor with pins and measuring tape. The elderly woman had fitted wedding dresses for 3 generations of Salem brides, her weathered hands capable of miracles with silk and lace. There's the bride-to-be, Mrs. Patterson chirped, but her usual warmth seemed forced. Let's get you into this gorgeous gown. The dress transformed Evangeline into someone she didn't recognize. The silk clung to curves she'd spent years hiding beneath modest clothes, and the neckline revealed more skin than she'd ever shown in public. She looked beautiful and terrified, a perfect bride for a man who bought wives like business acquisitions. You clean up nicely. Evangeline spun toward the unfamiliar voice. A woman stood in the parlor doorway, tall, elegant, with silver hair pulled into a severe chignon. Her expensive clothes and predatory smile marked her as someone from Caspian's world. "I'm Victoria Ravencrest," the woman announced. "Caspian's aunt. I didn't know he was coming," Evangeline said carefully. "He's not. I came to evaluate his investment." The casual cruelty of the statement hit like a slap. Mrs. Patterson's pins suddenly felt like tiny daggers against Evangeline's skin. "I beg your pardon." Victoria circled her slowly, examining every detail with clinical detachment. "My nephew has never shown interest in marriage. When he announced his engagement to a small-town minister's daughter, naturally the family became concerned." "Concerned about what?" "Whether you're worth the price he's paying." Evangeline's cheeks burned, but she kept her voice level. "And your verdict?" "You're prettier than expected, younger than his usual taste. But pretty girls are a dime a dozen in New York." Victoria stopped directly in front of her, pale blue eyes calculating. "What makes you special enough to tempt Caspian Ravencrest into matrimony?" "Maybe you should ask him." "I did. He gave me some nonsense about strategic alliances and social connections. We both know that's not the real reason." "Then what is?" Victoria's smile turned predatory. "That's what I'm here to discover." The woman pulled out her phone and scrolled through what appeared to be a background report. Evangeline Ashford, 28, never married, no romantic history, degree in elementary education, teaches Sunday school at Salem Community Church. Parents, Reverend Marcus Ashford and the late Helen Ashford. She paused meaningfully. Born in Salem General Hospital on October 15, 1996. Something in the way she emphasized the birth date sent chills down Evangeline's spine. "Is there a point to this recitation?" "Just confirming details. Though I noticed some interesting gaps in your early childhood records. Almost like certain information was deliberately obscured." Evangeline's hand instinctively moved to her pocket, where the mysterious bracelet lay hidden. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything, dear. I'm stating facts. Your adoption records were sealed when you were 8 years old. Quite unusual for a local adoption, don't you think?" The room tilted. Adoption records? Her father had never mentioned adoption. According to every story she'd ever heard, she was his biological daughter, born to his late wife Helen. "I think you're mistaken. Birth certificates can be altered, Miss Ashford, especially when certain people want to hide inconvenient truths." Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat nervously. "Perhaps we should focus on the dress fitting." "The dress is fine," Victoria interrupted. "What I want to know is why my nephew is willing to pay $3 million to marry a woman whose past doesn't exist before age 8. $3 million. The number hit Evangeline like a physical blow. She'd known her father's debts were substantial, but $3 million suggested something far beyond gambling losses. "I think you should leave," Evangeline managed. "Oh, I'm leaving. But consider this a friendly warning, Miss Ashford. The Ravencrest family protects its interests. If you're running some kind of long-term con on my nephew, we will discover it. And when we do, your father's debts will be the least of your problems." After Victoria left, the parlor felt contaminated by her presence. Mrs. Patterson worked in uncomfortable silence, pinning and adjusting with shaking hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Don't pay her any mind, dear. Victoria Ravencrest has always been a poisonous woman. Have you heard rumors about my adoption?" Mrs. Patterson's hands stilled. "Some things are better left buried, Evangeline." "What things?" "The night you came to live with your father, you were in a terrible state. Smoke inhalation, minor burns, nightmares that lasted for months. You kept asking for someone named Cass." The bracelet in her pocket seemed to burn against her leg. "Cass. Your father said it was probably your imaginary friend. Trauma does strange things to children's minds." But Evangeline knew better. "Cass. Short for Caspian." "Mrs. Patterson, what happened the night I came to live with my father?" The old woman's face went pale. "There was a fire at the Willowbrook School. Terrible tragedy. Dozens of children died." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The visions. The bracelet. Caspian's words about someone who saved his life. Was Caspian Ravencrest at that school? His younger sister Emma was. She didn't make it out. Evangeline's legs gave way, and she sank onto the parlor chair. Everything made sense now. The recognition in his eyes, the way he'd agreed to marry her, the astronomical price he was willing to pay. He remembered her. The little girl who'd led him to safety while his sister died in the flames. And he was marrying her not out of business necessity, but out of guilt. The wedding dress suddenly felt like a costume for an elaborate performance where she didn't know her lines. In 5 days, she would become Mrs. Caspian Ravencrest, bound to a man haunted by the same nightmare that had shaped her forgotten childhood. Outside, storm clouds gathered over Salem, echoing the tempest building in her chest. She was walking into a marriage built on buried secrets and survivor's guilt. But perhaps, she thought as she touched the Phoenix bracelet, she was the only person who could understand the ghosts that haunted Caspian Ravencrest. The question was whether they would heal each other or destroy what remained of their fractured souls. The Ravencrest estate loomed against the October sky like something from a Gothic novel. Evangeline pressed her face to the car window as they passed through iron gates that seemed designed to keep the world out rather than welcome guests in. Ancient oak trees lined the driveway, their bare branches reaching toward the mansion like skeletal fingers. Impressive, isn't it? Caspian's voice carried no warmth as he watched her reaction. Been in the family for 4 generations. The wedding ceremony at Salem Community Church had lasted exactly 23 minutes. No reception, no celebration, just legal words spoken before a handful of witnesses before they drove away from everything she'd ever known. Now, as his wife, she was crossing the threshold into a life that felt more like exile. The mansion's interior matched its forbidding exterior. Dark wood paneling, oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, and furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum rather than a home. Their footsteps echoed through halls that seemed to swallow sound and warmth alike. Mrs. Ashford. Sorry, Mrs. Ravencrest. Your room is this way. Evangeline turned toward the unfamiliar voice. A middle-aged woman with graying hair and kind eyes stood at the foot of a grand staircase. Her simple black dress and white apron marked her as household staff, but something in her manner suggested she held more authority than her position might indicate. This is Margaret, Caspian explained. She manages the household. Anything you need, ask her. Margaret's smile seemed genuine, unlike everything else Evangeline had encountered since arriving. I've prepared the blue guest room for you, ma'am. I thought you might prefer some time to settle in before. She trailed off, but the meaning was clear. Before sharing her husband's bed. Thank you, Evangeline managed. That's very thoughtful. Caspian's expression remained unreadable. I have business calls to make. We'll have dinner at 8. He disappeared into what appeared to be a study, leaving Evangeline alone with Margaret. The older woman's face softened once he was gone. Come along, dear. Let's get you comfortable. The blue guest room was elegant but impersonal, like a high-end hotel suite designed for temporary occupancy. Margaret had laid out a selection of nightgowns and robes, all in Evangeline's size, all expensive, all chosen by someone who didn't know her at all. He had these sent from New York, Margaret explained, noticing her stare, along with an entire wardrobe. I took the liberty of putting everything away. Evangeline opened the closet to find clothes she would never have chosen, designer dresses, silk blouses, shoes that cost more than most people's monthly rent. It was a rich man's idea of what his wife should wear, not an expression of her personality. He doesn't know me at all, does he? Margaret's pause spoke volumes. Mr. Caspian is complicated. He doesn't let people close easily. Did he tell you why he married me? No, ma'am. But I've worked for this family for 15 years. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you today. That surprised her. During the ceremony, Caspian had been polite but distant, going through the motions like a man fulfilling a business obligation. How did he look at me? Like he was seeing a ghost. The words sent ice through Evangeline's veins. A ghost, or the girl who'd saved his life 20 years ago. Dinner was a tense affair in a dining room designed to seat 20, but occupied by only 2. Caspian sat at the head of the mahogany table, while Evangeline took a seat to his right, close enough to speak without shouting, but far enough to maintain the emotional distance that seemed to define their relationship. The food is excellent, she offered, though the elaborate meal tasted like sawdust in her mouth. Margaret is an exceptional cook. He cut his steak with surgical precision. She'll prepare whatever you prefer. Just let her know your favorites. The conversation felt like they were reading from a script written by someone else. Polite strangers making small talk, while bigger truths lurked beneath the surface. Caspian, she said finally, We need to talk about what happened at Willowbrook. His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. For a moment, she thought he might continue pretending he didn't know what she meant. Then he set down his utensils and met her eyes directly. What do you remember? Fragments. Fire. Smoke. Leading someone to safety. She paused. I remember calling you Cass. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the careful control he maintained. You were 8 years old, brave beyond reason. Half the exits were blocked, but somehow you knew the way out. Your sister didn't make it. The words hit him like a physical blow. His hands clenched into fists on the table, and for a moment she saw past the successful businessman to the broken 15-year-old boy who'd lost everything that mattered. Emma was 6. She was supposed to be at a sleepover, but her friend got sick. I was there picking her up when the fire started. His voice turned hollow. I couldn't find her in the smoke. I was starting to panic when you appeared out of nowhere and grabbed my hand. I don't remember why I was there. You lived at the school. Willowbrook was an orphanage that doubled as a boarding school for children whose parents couldn't care for them. He stood abruptly and walked to the window overlooking the estate grounds. After you let me out, I tried to go back for Emma. The firefighters had to hold me back. I'm sorry. Don't. The word came out sharper than intended. Don't apologize for saving my life. But she understood now why he'd married her. Not love, not even gratitude, guilt. Survivor's guilt that had festered for 20 years, driving him to success that felt hollow because his sister would never share it. Is that why you chose me? Some kind of penance? I chose you because seeing you again felt like a sign. He turned back to face her. Like maybe I could finally make sense of why I lived when so many others didn't. The honesty was brutal and beautiful at the same time. Here was a man who'd built an empire but couldn't forgive himself for being alive. And now that you've married me, do you feel better? No. He moved closer, and she caught her breath at the intensity in his dark eyes. Now I feel like I've dragged you into my personal hell. The space between them seemed to crackle with tension. He was close enough that she could smell his cologne, could see the faint scar on his temple that she hadn't noticed before. Everything about him radiated controlled power, but underneath, she sensed something desperate and hungry. Maybe hell is where I belong too, she whispered. The words seemed to unlock something in him. One moment he was across the room. The next his hands were framing her face with surprising gentleness. You have no idea what you're saying. Then show me. The kiss was inevitable. A collision of 20 years of buried pain and sudden desperate need. His lips were firm but careful, as if he was afraid she might break. She rose on her toes and kissed him back with a boldness that surprised them both. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Evangeline, he said roughly, if we do this, there's no going back. I don't want to go back. I want to go forward. He swept her into his arms without warning, carrying her toward the stairs with purposeful strides. Margaret discreetly disappeared into the kitchen, giving them privacy for what felt like the first honest moment of their marriage. His bedroom was larger than her entire apartment in Salem, dominated by a king-sized bed that looked like it had never been used for anything as messy as human emotion. But when he set her down gently, his hands were shaking. I need you to be sure, he said quietly, because once I touch you, I won't be able to stop. She answered by reaching for the buttons of his shirt. Her fingers trembled, but her resolve was steady. This marriage might have started as a business transaction, but what was happening between them now felt like the most real thing in her life. When he kissed her again, there was nothing careful about it. 20 years of guilt and grief poured into desperate touches and whispered confessions. They made love like two people drowning who'd finally found something to hold on to. Afterward, as they lay tangled in sheets that cost more than her car, Evangeline traced the scars on his chest, souvenirs from the night that had bound their fates together. What happens now? She asked. Now we figure out how to live with each other. His arm tightened around her. And with the ghosts we can't escape. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the Ravencrest estate, promising rain that would wash away nothing but dust. Inside, two damaged souls had found each other again, though whether they would heal together or destroy each other remained to be seen. What Evangeline didn't know was that marrying Caspian Ravencrest had put her directly in the crosshairs of people who profited from keeping old secrets buried. People who would kill to prevent the truth about Willowbrook from ever coming to light. The honeymoon, such as it was, would be shorter than either of them imagined. Evangeline woke to an empty bed and the sound of Caspian's voice drifting through the walls. She could make out fragments of a heated phone conversation, words like containment and liability, that made her stomach clench with unease. 3 weeks had passed since their wedding night. 3 weeks of a strange dance between intimacy and distance. During the day, Caspian disappeared into his study or traveled to New York for business, maintaining the emotional walls he'd built over 20 years. But at night, when darkness fell and defenses crumbled, he reached for her with desperate hunger that left them both breathless and confused. She slipped on a silk robe and padded barefoot through the mansion's halls. The Ravencrest estate during daylight revealed details she'd missed in shadows. Family portraits with eyes that seemed to follow her movement, fresh flowers that Margaret replaced daily, and rooms that felt more like shrines than living spaces. The conversation grew clearer as she approached his study. "I don't care what it costs, Richard. Find out who's been asking questions about Willowbrook and shut it down." Caspian's voice carried steel beneath the surface calm. "Yes, I know it was 20 years ago. That's exactly why this is a problem." Evangeline froze outside the partially open door. Someone was investigating the fire? The same fire that had connected her to Caspian and buried her childhood memories? "What do you mean the adoption records were accessed? By whom?" A long pause. "That's impossible. Those files are sealed by court order." Her hand moved instinctively to her throat, where the phoenix bracelet now hung on a delicate chain. She'd started wearing it after their wedding night, though she couldn't explain why it felt like armor against unnamed threats. Find out who has clearance to access those files. And Richard? Make sure they understand the consequences of pursuing this investigation. The menace in his tone made her blood run cold. This wasn't the man who held her with trembling hands in the darkness. This was someone capable of making problems disappear permanently. She turned to retreat, but the old floorboard creaked under her weight. The conversation inside stopped abruptly. "I'll call you back." Evangeline barely had time to compose herself before the study door opened completely. Caspian stood in the doorway, still dressed in yesterday's clothes, his usually perfect appearance disheveled. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept after she'd drifted off in his arms. "You're up early," he said carefully. "I was looking for you." She kept her voice light, though her pulse hammered against her ribs. "You weren't in bed when I woke up. Couldn't sleep. Had some calls to make." He stepped aside to let her into the study. Business crisis in Tokyo. The lie came so smoothly, she almost believed it. Almost. The study was Caspian's domain. Leather-bound books, expensive scotch, and photographs that captured moments of success, but never joy. But today something was different. Papers were scattered across his normally pristine desk, and a laptop displayed what looked like legal documents. "Margaret's making breakfast," he said, moving to block her view of the desk. "You should eat something." "I'm not hungry." She stepped closer, trying to read the documents over his shoulder. "What's that?" "Just contracts." His hand slammed the laptop shut with more force than necessary. "Nothing that would interest you." The dismissal stung, reminding her that despite their physical intimacy, he still treated her like a stranger when it came to his business. But the Willowbrook investigation was her business too, whether he wanted to admit it or not. "Caspian, if someone is asking questions about the fire, how do you know about that?" The sharp question confirmed her suspicions. He had been discussing Willowbrook, and her eavesdropping had rattled him more than he was willing to show. "I heard you on the phone. You mentioned adoption records, and you were listening to a private conversation?" "I was looking for my husband, not conducting surveillance." She crossed her arms defensively. "But now I'm wondering why you're so determined to keep secrets from the woman you married." "Some secrets exist to protect people." "Protect them from what? The truth?" Something flickered across his features. Fear, she realized with surprise. Caspian Ravencrest, who commanded boardrooms and intimidated competitors, was afraid. "The truth about Willowbrook isn't something you want to uncover, Evangeline. Trust me on this." "Maybe I should be the judge of that. You were 8 years old. You have no idea what really happened that night." "Then tell me." He turned away, but not before she caught the flash of pain in his dark eyes. "Some knowledge comes with a price. Once you know certain things, you can never go back to innocence." "I lost my innocence the night I led you out of that burning building." The words came out harder than she'd intended. "I've been living with fragments and nightmares for 20 years. Don't you think I deserve to know why?" For a long moment, they stared at each other across the study. Then Caspian moved to the window overlooking the estate grounds, his posture rigid with internal conflict. "The fire wasn't an accident," he said finally. The simple statement hit her like a physical blow. What? Someone said it deliberately. The investigation was buried, the evidence destroyed, the truth covered up by people with enough power to rewrite history. But why? Who would want to hurt children? The fire wasn't about hurting children. It was about silencing someone who knew too much about certain business practices. About eliminating a witness who could have exposed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of Salem's government. Evangeline sank into the leather chair facing his desk, struggling to process the implications. What kind of conspiracy? Money laundering, political corruption, murder disguised as accidents. He turned back to face her, his expression grim. Willowbrook was being used as a front for illegal activities. Someone discovered the truth and threatened to expose it. Who? Your mother. The words hit like lightning, illuminating terrible possibilities she'd never considered. My mother died when I was young. Your adoptive mother, Helen Ashford, died of cancer. Your biological mother, Sarah Mitchell, died in the Willowbrook fire. His voice gentled slightly. She was a social worker who discovered that children at the orphanage were being used to transport drugs and money. When she threatened to go to the authorities, they eliminated her along with any evidence of their operation. You're saying my mother was murdered? I'm saying she died because she tried to protect children who couldn't protect themselves, including you. The room seemed to spin around her. Everything she believed about her origins, her family, her past, all lies built on a foundation of violence and corruption. How do you know all this? Because my family was involved. The admission hung between them like a blade. Evangeline stared at her husband, seeing a stranger where moments before she'd seen the man who whispered her name in the darkness. Involved how? The Ravencrest shipping business provided the perfect cover for moving illegal goods through Boston's ports. My father and uncle were partners in the operation until things got too dangerous. They tried to pull out, but you don't just walk away from people like that. And now someone is investigating again. Someone with access to sealed records and the authority to ask questions that should have stayed buried. He moved to the desk and pulled out a thick manila folder. Richard thinks it might be connected to your marriage. That our union has drawn attention to connections people assumed were safely forgotten. What kind of connections? Instead of answering, he opened the folder and spread photographs across the desk. Crime scene photos from the night of the fire, official reports with entire sections blacked out, and newspaper clippings that told sanitized versions of the truth. One photograph made her gasp, a young woman with dark hair and familiar green eyes lying in a hospital bed, her face unmarked but her body clearly broken. That's her, Caspian said quietly. Your mother. She died 3 days after the fire from smoke inhalation, but not before she told the authorities everything she knew. Then why wasn't anyone prosecuted? Because the authorities she trusted were part of the conspiracy. Evangeline picked up the photograph with shaking hands. Her mother's face was peaceful, as if she'd simply fallen asleep. But knowing she'd died trying to protect children made the image almost unbearable. What happened to her testimony? Destroyed, along with most of the evidence. The official story was that a faulty electrical system caused the fire. Case closed. But you know differently. My father kept copies of everything. Insurance, he called it. Protection against the people he'd been forced to work with. Caspian's jaw tightened. It didn't save him. 3 months after the fire, he died in a car accident that wasn't an accident. And your uncle? Suicide, according to the police report. Guilty conscience over the children who died, they said. The pattern was becoming clear, systematic elimination of anyone who could connect the fire to the larger conspiracy. How many people died to keep this secret? More than you want to know. He began gathering the photographs back into the folder. Which is why I need you to stay away from this investigation. Let me handle it. Handle it how? By threatening whoever is asking questions? His silence was answer enough. You can't solve this with intimidation, Caspian. If there's evidence, if there's a way to expose the truth won't bring back the children who died. It will only put you in danger. I'm already in danger. She stood and faced him across the desk. Someone killed my mother and dozens of innocent children. They covered it up for 20 years, and now they're watching us. Do you really think ignoring this will make it go away? I think stirring up the past will get you killed." The blunt statement hung between them like a challenge. Outside, clouds gathered over the estate, promising another storm. Inside, Evangeline felt the weight of 20 years of lies pressing down on her shoulders. "Maybe some things are worth dying for," she said quietly. "Not you." The words came out raw, unfiltered. "I won't lose you too." For the first time since she discovered his investigation, she saw past his carefully maintained control to the terrified man beneath. He'd lost his sister, his father, his uncle. Everyone he'd ever loved had been destroyed by the secrets surrounding Willowbrook. Now he was married to the one person who could unravel the entire conspiracy, and he was caught between protecting her and protecting the truth that had already cost him everything. The confrontation with her father happened on a gray November morning when the trees around Salem Community Church stood bare as bones against the sky. Evangeline had driven from the estate alone, despite Caspian's protests, carrying the manila folder of evidence in her trembling hands. Reverend Marcus Ashford looked older than his 62 years as he sat behind his familiar desk, the same desk where he'd announced her arranged marriage 6 weeks ago. The foreclosure notice was gone, replaced by new financial documents that suggested the church's troubles had been permanently resolved. "You lied to me," Evangeline said without preamble, setting the folder down between them. "About everything." Her father's weathered face went pale as he recognized the crime scene photographs spilling from the manila envelope. "Evangeline, you shouldn't have those. My mother didn't die of cancer, did she? Helen Ashford never existed." "Helen was real," he said quietly. "She was my first wife. She died when you were 3. Before or after you took me from the hospital?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Outside, the church bells chimed 10 o'clock, their familiar sound now seeming hollow and mournful. "How much do you know?" her father asked finally. "I know Sarah Mitchell was my biological mother. I know she died in the Willowbrook fire after trying to expose a conspiracy. What I don't know is how a minister became involved in covering up murder." Reverend Ashford stood slowly and moved to the window overlooking the church cemetery. Many of Salem's founding families were buried there, their weathered headstones marking centuries of secrets buried along with their bones. "I wasn't always a minister," he said. "Before I found God, I was Marcus Ashford, city councilman and very stupid man who thought he could take money from dangerous people without consequences. You were part of the conspiracy. I was a small part. They needed someone in city government to approve certain zoning permits, to look the other way when inspections came up clean despite obvious violations." His voice carried decades of guilt. "I told myself I was just bending rules, not breaking them. Until children started dying. Until Sarah Mitchell came to me with evidence that children were being used as drug mules. She had photographs, financial records, testimony from kids who'd been threatened into silence." He turned back to face her. "She asked me to help her take it to the state authorities. But you didn't." "I tried to. I called the Attorney General's office, set up a meeting. But someone got to Sarah first." His hands shook as he picked up one of the crime scene photos. "They made it look like an accident. Faulty wiring, they said. But I knew better. And you did nothing." "I did what I could. When they brought you to the hospital, burned and traumatized, I knew they'd kill you too if they thought you remembered anything important. So I took you." "Stole me, you mean?" "Saved you." The words came out sharp with old pain. "I falsified adoption records, created a new identity, moved us to Salem where nobody would ask questions about a widowed minister raising his late wife's daughter." Evangeline sank into the chair facing his desk, struggling to process the magnitude of his deception. "You made me believe Helen Ashford was my mother. I gave you a mother who could love you without putting you in danger. Helen died of cancer when you were 5, but for 2 years, she loved you like her own daughter. What about my real family? Did Sarah Mitchell have relatives who wondered what happened to me? No living family. That's part of why she was targeted. Nobody with power would miss her if she disappeared." The casual cruelty of it made Evangeline's stomach turn. Her mother had died alone, trying to protect children nobody else cared enough to save. "Why didn't you go to the authorities after the fire?" "Because half the authorities were involved." He pulled out a thick ledger from his desk drawer. "This contains records of every payoff, every bribe, every illegal favor traded over 15 years. Police commissioners, judges, state senators. The corruption went all the way to the governor's office." "Then why keep records?" "Insurance. As long as I had proof of their involvement, they had to leave us alone. He set the ledger on the desk between them. It worked for 20 years. Until I married Caspian Ravencrest. Until you married into the family that provided transportation for their entire operation. Now they're worried the past might catch up with them. Evangeline opened the ledger, scanning pages of careful handwriting documenting decades of corruption. Names she recognized from Salem's City Council, businesses that were pillars of the community, charitable organizations that had apparently been fronts for money laundering. Who contacted you? Richard Sterling, Caspian's lawyer. He wanted to know if you'd recovered any memories from the fire, if you'd mentioned anything about that night. Her father's jaw tightened. I told him you remembered nothing. But that's not true anymore. No, which is why you need to be very careful, daughter. These people have killed to protect their secrets before. They killed my mother. They killed Caspian's father and uncle. How many others? Too many to count. He closed the ledger with finality, which is why you need to let this go. I can't let it go. Those children deserve justice. Those children are dead. You're alive. Don't throw away the life Sarah Mitchell died to give you. The argument was interrupted by a sharp knock on the study door. Mrs. Henderson's voice called through the wood with unusual urgency. Reverend Ashford, there are some men here to see you. They say it's about church business. Evangeline met her father's eyes and saw her own fear reflected there. Church business at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, less than an hour after she'd arrived with evidence that could destroy powerful people. Hide the ledger, he whispered, moving toward the door. She grabbed the thick book and shoved it into her purse just as the study door opened. Two men in expensive suits entered without invitation, their predatory smiles not reaching their cold eyes. Reverend Ashford, the taller man said, and Mrs. Ravencrest. How convenient to find you both here. I don't believe we've met, her father replied carefully. Thomas Blackwood. I represent certain business interests in Boston. He gestured to his companion. This is Mr. Kane. We're here to discuss some concerns about recent activities. What kind of concerns? The kind that arise when people start asking questions about matters that were settled long ago. Blackwood's gaze fixed on Evangeline. Questions about fires, adoption records, and sealed court documents. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. Just like you don't know why your new husband has been hiring private investigators to look into the Willowbrook case. The casual mention of Caspian's investigation sent ice through Evangeline's veins. These men knew everything. About the marriage, about the evidence, about the renewed interest in a case everyone wanted to stay buried. My husband's business affairs don't concern you, she said with more confidence than she felt. Oh, but they do. You see, Mrs. Ravencrest, your husband's shipping company still holds certain contracts with our associates. Contracts that could be canceled if misunderstandings arose about past relationships. Are you threatening him? I'm offering guidance. Sometimes the past is better left undisturbed, especially when disturbing it might harm innocent people. Kane stepped closer, his bulk intimidating despite his expensive clothes. People like your father, for instance. It would be tragic if something happened to Salem's beloved minister. You can't intimidate us into silence. We're not intimidating anyone, Blackwood replied smoothly. We're simply pointing out that accidents happen to people who don't exercise proper caution. Her father moved protectively closer. I think you gentlemen should leave. We're leaving. But first, a small gift for Mrs. Ravencrest. Blackwood pulled out a manila envelope and set it on the desk. Photographs from your mother's funeral. I thought you might like to see who attended. Despite every instinct screaming at her to leave the envelope untouched, Evangeline found herself opening it with shaking hands. Inside were photographs of a small cemetery service. Sarah Mitchell's casket, surrounded by perhaps a dozen mourners. But it wasn't the sparse crowd that made her gasp. It was the man standing in the background, partially hidden behind a large headstone, but clearly visible in profile. Marcus Ashford, 20 years younger but unmistakably her father, watching Sarah Mitchell's burial from the shadows. As you can see, Blackwood continued conversationally, your father has always taken a personal interest in your welfare. It would be a shame if that dedication to your safety was misunderstood by certain parties. After the men left, the study felt contaminated by their presence. Evangeline stared at the photograph, trying to reconcile the image with everything her father had told her. You attended her funeral. I owed her that much. Did you love her? The question hung between them for a long moment before he answered. I loved the woman she was. Brave, principled, willing to risk everything for children she barely knew. His voice broke slightly. I loved the woman I could never be worthy of. Understanding dawned slowly. Her father hadn't just covered up Sarah Mitchell's murder. He'd been in love with her. The guilt that had driven him to the ministry, the careful way he'd protected Evangeline's secret, the decades of penance he'd performed. She would have been proud of the woman you've become, he said quietly. But she would also want you to survive. Then help me expose the truth. Help me finish what she started. Even if it costs us everything. Evangeline thought of Caspian, haunted by his own survivor's guilt. Of the children who died because adults had cared more about money than innocent lives. Of her mother, who died alone trying to do the right thing. Some things are worth more than everything, she said finally. Outside, storm clouds gathered over Salem, promising rain that would wash the streets clean but leave the deeper stains untouched. Inside the church study, a minister and his adopted daughter began planning how to resurrect secrets that powerful people had killed to bury. They had evidence, determination, and 20 years of accumulated guilt driving them forward. Whether that would be enough to survive what was coming remained to be seen. The private investigator's office in downtown Boston looked nothing like the glamorous detective agencies from movies. Jake Morrison operated out of a cramped space above a Chinese restaurant, surrounded by filing cabinets and coffee-stained paperwork that suggested business was either very good or very bad. Evangeline sat across from his cluttered desk, while Caspian paced behind her like a caged predator. They'd driven to Boston together that morning, united for the first time since their marriage in pursuit of something more important than their complicated feelings for each other. 20 years is a long time to keep evidence buried, Morrison said, spreading crime scene photographs across his desk. But corruption this deep leaves scars. You just have to know where to look. What have you found? Caspian asked tersely. Enough to get us all killed if the wrong people find out. Morrison pulled up digital files on his computer screen. The Willowbrook fire was the culmination of a 15-year operation that moved over $50 million through Salem's port facilities. $50 million? Evangeline struggled to process the scale of what she was hearing. Drugs from South America, laundered through legitimate businesses, then distributed across New England. Your mother stumbled onto the transportation network when she started investigating why so many Willowbrook children were being taken on overnight trips to Boston. Morrison clicked through photographs of official documents, many bearing signatures Evangeline recognized from her father's ledger. The beauty of the operation was its simplicity. Who questions a church group taking orphans to see the harbor? Who inspects buses full of children heading to educational field trips? They used children as cover for transporting drugs, Caspian said flatly, and as mules when needed. Small amounts, hidden in school supplies or lunchboxes. The kids were told they were helping with special church business, that God would punish them if they told anyone. The systematic abuse of innocent children made Evangeline's stomach turn. How many children were involved? Hard to say. Records were destroyed, witnesses disappeared. But based on transportation logs I found, at least 200 kids passed through the program over 15 years. And Sarah Mitchell discovered this. She discovered more than that. Morrison pulled up bank records on his screen. She found evidence that the operation reached the highest levels of state government. The governor's chief of staff was taking monthly payments. 3 state senators were on the payroll. Even the fire marshal who cleared the building weeks before it burned down. That's why they killed her, Evangeline said quietly. That's why they killed everyone. Your mother was the threat that could have brought down the entire network. Once they eliminated her, they had to eliminate anyone else who might have seen the evidence. Morrison clicked to a new file containing newspaper clippings and official reports. 6 months after the fire, investigative reporter named David Chun started asking questions about the insurance settlement. Found dead in his apartment from an apparent suicide. 2 months later, State Auditor Margaret Walsh discovered irregularities in Salem's municipal accounts. Died in a car accident on the way to meet with federal prosecutors. How many people did they kill? Caspian's voice was deadly quiet. 17 that I can document. Probably more that were made to look natural. Morrison's expression was grim. These people don't leave loose ends. What about the current investigation? Who's been accessing the sealed records? That's where things get interesting. Morrison pulled up a government database. The inquiries are coming from within the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force. Someone with legitimate authority has reopened the case. Do you know who? Special Agent Rebecca Walsh, Margaret Walsh's daughter. The revelation hit Evangeline like a physical blow. The daughter of one of the conspiracy's victims had grown up to become a federal agent, and now she was investigating her mother's murder. She's been building a case for 3 years, Morrison continued. Started when she found her mother's personal files hidden in a safety deposit box. Evidence that Margaret Walsh had been preparing to expose the entire operation before she was killed. What kind of evidence? Financial records, recorded conversations, photographs of meetings between known criminals and government officials. Enough to indict dozens of people if she can prove it's authentic. Caspian stopped pacing. Why hasn't she acted yet? Because she needs living witnesses to corroborate the documentary evidence. Most of the people involved are dead or have disappeared. But your marriage to Evangeline created a new opportunity. How? You're both survivors of the Willowbrook fire. You both have legitimate reasons to remember details from that night. If Agent Walsh can get you to testify about what you saw, she can use your testimony to authenticate the evidence her mother died protecting. Evangeline felt the weight of 20 years of injustice pressing down on her shoulders. She wants us to be witnesses against the people who killed our families. She wants you to help her finish what your mother started. The office fell silent except for the distant sounds of traffic and the Chinese restaurant below. Outside, Boston's financial district bustled with legitimate business while blocks away, evidence of massive corruption waited for someone brave enough to expose it. What's the risk? Caspian asked finally. Extreme. The moment you agree to testify, you become targets. These people have killed federal witnesses before, made it look like accidents or suicides. They have resources, connections, and absolutely no conscience about eliminating threats. And if we don't testify? The case dies. The evidence gets buried again. Your mother's murders go unpunished, and the children who died at Willowbrook never get justice. Evangeline reached for Caspian's hand, finding strength in his steady grip. When does Agent Walsh want to meet? Tonight. She's in Salem, staying at a hotel under an assumed name. She says she has additional evidence to show you. Things that were too sensitive to trust to anyone else. What kind of evidence? Morrison's expression darkened. Proof that the conspiracy didn't end with the Willowbrook fire. That it's still operating, still using children, still killing anyone who gets too close to the truth. The implications sent ice through Evangeline's veins. They weren't just dealing with a 20-year-old cover-up. They were facing an active criminal enterprise that would kill to protect itself. Give her our answer, Caspian said quietly. We'll meet her tonight. As they left Morrison's office, Evangeline wondered if they were walking toward justice or their own destruction. But for the first time since her marriage, she and Caspian were united in purpose. They would expose the truth about Willowbrook, no matter the cost. The children who died there deserved nothing less. The Salem Harbor Hotel sat on the waterfront like a forgotten relic, its Victorian facade weathered by decades of salt air and neglect. Evangeline and Caspian arrived separately, using different entrances as Agent Walsh had instructed, their caution justified by the black sedan that had followed them from Boston. Room 237 was at the end of a dimly lit corridor that smelled of old carpet and industrial disinfectant. Caspian knocked twice, paused, then knocked 3 times, the signal Morrison had given them. The woman who opened the door looked nothing like Evangeline had expected. Agent Rebecca Walsh was petite and blonde, with tired eyes that belonged on someone twice her 35 years. Her resemblance to the murdered auditor Margaret Walsh was unmistakable in the crime scene photographs Morrison had shown them. "Thank you for coming," she said, ushering them inside quickly. "I wasn't sure you would." The hotel room had been transformed into a makeshift command center. Evidence boards covered the walls, connected by red string that mapped relationships between victims, perpetrators, and cover-up participants. Financial records, photographs, and police reports created a 20-year timeline of corruption and murder. "My mother died believing she was the only one fighting this," Walsh said, gesturing toward the overwhelming display. "Turns out she was part of a network of people who tried to expose the truth, all of whom ended up dead," Caspian observed grimly. "All except one." Walsh pulled out a file folder marked with today's date. "Marcus Ashford has been feeding information to the FBI for 6 months. He's been our inside source. Evangeline's breath caught. My father is working with you? He contacted us after your marriage created new attention on the case. He was afraid the renewed interest would get you killed, so he offered to provide evidence in exchange for protection. What kind of evidence? Walsh opened the folder, revealing copies of documents Evangeline recognized from her father's ledger. Financial records, correspondence, recorded conversations. 20 years of insurance against the people who forced him to participate in the conspiracy. You said the operation was still active, Caspian said. How? Different methods, same players. Instead of using orphanages, they've moved to youth programs, charter schools, youth sports leagues. Any organization that regularly transports children across state lines. Walsh clicked open her laptop, showing surveillance footage of children boarding buses marked with the logo of the Salem Youth Foundation. This was taken last month. Those children think they're going to a basketball tournament in Connecticut. They're actually carrying drugs to distributors in Hartford. The casual exploitation of innocent children made Evangeline sick with rage. How many children are involved now? We estimate over 300 kids across 5 states, all being used as unwitting mules or cover for transportation. Most of them never know they're carrying anything illegal. And the same people who killed my mother are running this. Some of them. Others have died or retired, but the core leadership remains intact. Walsh pulled up photographs of men Evangeline didn't recognize. Thomas Blackwood runs the Boston operations. Senator William Hartley provides political protection. Judge Patricia Morrison ensures legal challenges disappear. Morrison, Caspian's voice sharpened. Any relation to Jake Morrison? His uncle. That's how we knew we could trust him to investigate without compromising the case. The pieces were falling into place. A web of corruption that reached every level of government and society, protected by family connections and mutual blackmail. What do you need from us? Evangeline asked. Testimony. You're both survivors who can authenticate the evidence about Willowbrook. Your statements will tie the historical crimes to the current operation. And in exchange, justice for your families. Protection under federal witness security. New identities if necessary. The offer hung in the air like a lifeline. Everything they'd suffered, everything they'd lost, could finally be answered with the truth. There's something else, Walsh continued reluctantly. We have reason to believe they're planning to eliminate both of you within the next 48 hours. The words hit like ice water. How do you know? Intercepted communications. They see your marriage as too great a risk. 2 survivors who might remember too much, working together to uncover the truth. What kind of elimination? Probably staged as an accident. Car crash, house fire, murder-suicide. Something that eliminates both targets and discredits any evidence you might have gathered. Evangeline reached for Caspian's hand, finding comfort in his steady grip. They'd found each other again after 20 years, only to discover their reunion had signed their death warrants. How long do we have? Hours, not days. I need your statements tonight. Then we move you to a federal safe house until the arrests are made. What about my father? Already in protective custody. He was moved this afternoon after we intercepted plans to eliminate him as well. The systematic threat to everyone she loved crystallized Evangeline's resolve. These people had killed her mother, murdered Caspian's family, destroyed hundreds of innocent lives, and now they wanted to silence the only witnesses who could expose their crimes. I'll testify, she said firmly. So will I, Caspian added. Whatever it takes to stop them. Walsh nodded grimly. Then we'd better get started. The grand jury convenes tomorrow morning, and we need to present evidence that will justify arresting some of the most powerful people in New England. As they began recording their statements, Evangeline felt the weight of 20 years lifting from her shoulders. Her mother's death would finally have meaning. The children who died at Willowbrook would have justice. Outside the hotel window, Salem Harbor stretched toward the horizon, its dark waters holding secrets that were finally coming to light. The price of truth would be everything they'd built together. But some things were worth more than safety, more than comfort, more than life itself. Justice was one of them. The warehouse smelled of rust and abandonment, a forgotten relic of Salem's industrial past that had become the perfect place for desperate people to make their final stand. Evangeline's wrists burned against the zip ties as consciousness returned slowly, bringing with it the memory of screeching tires and shattered glass. They'd been 2 blocks from the federal courthouse when the black sedan rammed their car. Professional kidnappers had dragged them from the wreckage while bystanders scattered, loading them into a van before sirens could reach the scene. "You're awake." Thomas Blackwood's voice carried satisfaction as he emerged from the shadows. Behind him stood Kane and two other men she didn't recognize, all armed and looking like they'd done this before. Caspian hung unconscious from chains 3 feet away, blood trickling from a head wound that made her stomach clench with fear. They'd stripped him to the waist, revealing scars she'd traced with gentle fingers during stolen moments of intimacy. "Where are we?" she managed through a throat raw from screaming. "Somewhere Agent Walsh will never find you. We've been planning this contingency for months, ever since your marriage created complications. The FBI knows we're missing. The FBI knows you died in a tragic car accident. Very sad. Young couple killed on their way to testify against imaginary criminals." Blackwood's smile was predatory. "Your bodies will be found in a few days, burned beyond recognition, but with enough DNA to confirm your identities. You can't cover this up forever. We've covered it up for 20 years. Your mother thought she was clever too, right until the moment she realized how alone she really was." The casual mention of Sarah Mitchell ignited rage that burned through Evangeline's fear. "She died trying to protect children you were using as slaves. She died because she forgot that some people are more valuable alive than others. Children from the system, orphans nobody misses, they serve a purpose. Idealistic social workers who think they can change the world?" He shrugged. "Expendable." Kane stepped forward with a tablet, showing surveillance footage of the courthouse where dozens of FBI agents waited for testimony that would never come. "Your federal friends are getting restless. Time to send them a message about the futility of pursuing ancient history." "What message?" "That some secrets are worth dying for." Blackwood nodded to one of his men, who began setting up camera equipment. "We're going to record your confession about making false accusations against respected community leaders. Then we're going to record your tragic murder-suicide, brought on by guilt over lying to federal investigators. Nobody will believe that. People believe what they're told by authorities they trust, and we own enough authorities to control the narrative." The plan was sickeningly thorough: eliminate the witnesses, discredit their testimony, and walk away clean while hundreds of children continued suffering in silence. "You have one chance to make this easier on both of you," Blackwood continued. "Tell us where your father hid the original evidence, and we'll make your deaths quick. Go to hell." The defiant words earned her a backhanded slap that split her lip and made stars explode behind her eyes. But the pain also triggered something unexpected: a rush of memories from that night 20 years ago when another monster had underestimated her strength. She'd been 8 years old, terrified and alone, but she'd found courage when it mattered most. She'd saved Caspian then by trusting her instincts and refusing to give up. "Time to do it again. You want to know where the evidence is?" she said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "It's not hidden. It's already been delivered to the media." Blackwood's confidence wavered slightly. "You're lying. My father gave everything to reporters at the Boston Globe this morning. Financial records, recorded conversations, photographs of your meetings with Senator Hartley." She smiled through her split lip. "By tomorrow, your faces will be on every front page in New England." It was a complete bluff, but doubt flickered across Blackwood's features. He pulled out his phone and began making rapid calls, trying to confirm whether news outlets had received damaging information. The distraction gave Evangeline the opportunity she'd been hoping for. During her months at the Ravencrest estate, she'd learned that the antique bracelet she wore wasn't just a sentimental keepsake. It was sharp enough to cut through rope when properly applied. The zip ties required more patience than rope, but fear and determination made her hands steady as she worked the bracelet's edge against the plastic. The phoenix pendant her 8-year-old self had treasured became salvation as the bonds finally parted. Caspian stirred as she reached him, consciousness returning just as she freed his hands. "Can you move?" she whispered. "Yeah." His voice was rough but alert. "How many?" "4, plus Blackwood. They're distracted." "On 3. She nodded, adrenaline replacing fear as they prepared to fight for their lives. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. 3. They moved simultaneously, Caspian lunging for the nearest gunman, while Evangeline grabbed a metal pipe from the warehouse debris. 20 years of survivor's guilt transformed into pure fury as she struck Kane across the temple, dropping him like a stone. The fight was brutal but brief. Caspian's business success had been built on more than financial acumen. His military training from years ago served him well against men who'd relied too heavily on weapons and intimidation. When the dust settled, 3 of their captors lay unconscious while Blackwood cowered behind overturned crates, his earlier confidence shattered. "Federal agents are surrounding this building," Caspian said quietly, zip-tying the man who'd orchestrated 20 years of corruption and murder. Agent Walsh tracked our phones. The sound of helicopters and sirens confirmed his words. Outside, tactical teams were taking positions for an assault that was no longer necessary. "It's over," Evangeline told Blackwood. "The children you've been using, the families you've destroyed, the people you've killed, all of it ends today." As FBI agents flooded the warehouse, Evangeline found herself wrapped in Caspian's arms, both of them shaking with reaction and relief. They'd survived the night that should have killed them, just as they'd survived the fire that brought them together. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "I should have said it sooner. I love you too." She pulled back to meet his eyes. "Both the boy who needed saving and the man who saved me right back." 6 months later, they stood in Salem Community Church for a second wedding ceremony. This one celebrated by choice rather than obligation. The criminal trials had ended with convictions that dismantled a conspiracy spanning 2 decades. Hundreds of children were finally safe. Marcus Ashford officiated the ceremony with tears in his eyes, blessing a union that had begun in trauma but blossomed into something pure and unbreakable. Rebecca Walsh stood as Evangeline's matron of honor, representing all the victims who'd finally received justice. As they exchanged vows written from their hearts rather than legal necessity, Evangeline felt Sarah Mitchell's presence like a blessing. Her mother's courage lived on in the truth they'd exposed, in the children they'd saved, in the love that had survived everything thrown against it. The phoenix pendant gleamed at her throat, no longer a symbol of survival, but of resurrection. They'd emerged from the ashes of their past stronger than either could have imagined alone. Some love stories begin with meet-cuties and grand gestures. Theirs had begun with fire and tragedy, guilt and secrets. But all the best love stories end the same way, with 2 souls finding home in each other, no matter how far they'd traveled through darkness to get there.